it's exacerbated in the case of Australia, the willingness to dispense with civil liberties on the domestic front in the face of the pandemic threat. And I wonder first about the legality of such moves. It seems to me that if the lockdowns and the mandatory vaccination policies are in fact constitutionally valid, that our civil liberties aren't very well protected at all. Now that we've established lockdowns as acceptable, what level of threat justifies their imposition? How serious does it have to be? These precedents are being established at an unprecedented rate. And there's a principle underneath it, which is, well, you can't be too safe. That may be true, but don't be so sure that the policies that are put in hypothetically to ensure your safety are going to have that effect and no others. Questioning the mandatory vaccination policy on Nuremberg grounds, essentially, that it's a violation of the idea that medical treatment can be enforced by the state. In one of our provinces, there were no exceptions, no religious exceptions, no exceptions for health reasons, no exceptions, period. Okay, now, I'm vaccinated twice. I'll get the vaccine. You fucking leave me alone. But I'm sympathetic to those who are leery of the mandatory vaccination as policy or the vaccinations per se because they have health objections or ethical objections. And so, but even more so, it's like, what are the dangers of alienating people from the health system entirely, from the scientific establishment entirely by politicizing it in this manner? We're not thinking that through. You said that that's the company's responsibility to ensure that. So does that mean that the decision about what healthcare is appropriate has now been ceded by the US government to corporate interests? And where the hell is that going to end precisely? I do all sorts of things that are hypothetically dangerous to other people, like drive, for example, which I suspect is far more dangerous than COVID. And yet I'm allowed to do that. You know, we're setting a very strange precedent here. To make the vaccines mandatory and to punish people who refuse them, it seems to me that it's a sign of the failure of the vaccination arguments, essentially. If you haven't made the arguments credible enough to convince the percentage of people that you think should be vaccinated to be vaccinated, then that's a failure of your argument. And then to move to use political force and police force to insist is only going to increase the distrust that's driving the resistance to the vaccines to begin with. That's going to produce a long-term, permanent, serious damage in the credibility of those institutions. And that's going to have a tremendous cost in terms of health as well. Hoping that the vaccination rates are going to exceed 90%, I think that's a high-end estimate, and I might be wrong about that, is a pipe dream. Too much force is going to have to be applied to people to get them to do that, and many people will just not do it. And then what are we going to do with those people? Are they now pariahs? Are they now criminals? So I see that we're in danger of exchanging the possibility of pandemic damage with the certainty of the danger of authoritarian imposition. I think the government and the health authorities would be much more credible if they said, look, we really think these vaccines work, but we're not in the business of forcing them on you. You can make that choice. We've done what we could to provide them for you. Now it's in your hands. And is that a stupid idea? Because I don't know, but I'm not impressed by this creeping authoritarianism in the name of public safety. I just can't see that that's going to go well. With regards to the death statistic, is it the case that no matter what the pre-existing condition was, if the person was positive for COVID and they died, the death is attributed to COVID? That makes the basic statistics upon which all these decisions are being made, well, questionable. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but it's certainly questionable. Can we trust the death rate statistics? Do we actually know how dangerous this illness is? Now, people look at it as excess mortality over a given time period, and that seems to me to be more reliable, but it's not unreasonable to ask these questions. And that opens up a broader issue too. You know, the secondary negative consequences of the health measures. It's also taken everyone a while to see what those were. Like COVID was an immediate threat. It was going to happen right now, like the increase in suicide rates. That's sort of downstream, right? That wasn't on the table when the decisions were originally being made. So what do you think the best rationale is for mandatory vaccination? What's the best description of the danger that's posed socially by people who refuse to be vaccinated? Is the argument that they're also a terrible danger to those who've been vaccinated? I mean, as the vaccination rates increase, and they're fairly high in Canada, I think we're near 80%. I'm unclear about exactly the danger that the unvaccinated are posing. What's your understanding of, given those vaccination rates? What's your understanding of that, and what's the justification for their restriction of civil liberties? So I'm unclear about exactly what permission being vaccinated grants me, and I'm unclear about what precise danger the unvaccinated pose to the vaccinated. If it's extremely high, then you think, well, then what is the use of the vaccination? But I'm still unclear about this. Are the unvaccinated primarily posing a danger to the other unvaccinated? But if it's the unvaccinated are dangerous to the other unvaccinated, it's like, well, at some point, what are you going to do about that? Force people? I don't know what these new regulations in the US are going, what kind of response they're going to produce, but I can't imagine that it's going to do anything but exacerbate the tension between the left and the right that already exists in that country, and that is severe enough to be somewhat destabilizing already. We're going to introduce vaccine passports in my home province in Ontario, despite the fact that there's a conservative government in power at the moment. And there won't be as much of a reaction to that in Canada as there will be in the US to similar measures. But it just seems to me that that default to force is an admission that the argumentation has been stunningly inadequate. And instead of addressing the problem of the inadequate argumentation, the shortcut is, well, those people are too stupid to know what's good for them, and for the sake of everyone else's well-being, it's justifiable to force them. That might even be okay if it was going to produce the results that are intended. But I don't think it's going to. I think it's going to produce a kickback that will make things worse on the vaccination front rather than better. You know, part of the reason the US has given up on the war on drugs is because it was unenforceable. You had to push the state so far in a police state direction to stop people from using substances like marijuana that everyone eventually just said, look, man, it's just the cure is worse than the disease. Reasonable people can certainly make that argument that there's tremendous danger in making an active, invasive medical procedure mandatory. Terrible danger from a precedent perspective. You know, because what if it does turn out, for example, that one of these vaccines has unforeseen long-term consequences, and it's been given to hundreds of millions of people? And the fact that a percentage of the population perhaps exaggerates that possibility because they're more conspiratorial in their thinking, or less trusting, or more skeptical of government, benevolence, and health, and all of that. I don't really care. You can't eradicate the possibility that their objections, guided by their conscience, let's say, are, and this is your point with regards to conscientious objection. You said that even when we were fighting the Nazis, we weren't so certain that you couldn't say no because you had a different set of beliefs that were truly and validly held. And then I am also concerned about the precedent we're setting. And I suppose people who were opposed seatbelt laws and helmet laws and that sort of thing had the same sort of notion, which is, well, once you let the government decide what's good for you, where does it stop? Like, I'm firmly convinced, and maybe this is my own paranoia, I'm firmly convinced that if the automobile had been invented today, that the average person would not be allowed to drive. I don't think we would allow that level of risk. And I think that's really unfortunate. So it's a good thing that, you know, it came along slowly and sort of snuck in, because driving is a very dangerous act, and it's publicly dangerous too. We kill lots of people with our automobiles, yet we're allowed to do it, so to speak. And to think that that the right way of phrasing that is that we're allowed that's not a good way of thinking about it. Right? Well, and we've been able to, I suppose, devalue our currency by distributing money extraordinarily generously during this time of crisis. And that isn't a sustainable response. God only knows what damage we're doing to our future economic prosperity by continuing to make it extraordinarily difficult for many people to engage in productive activity. How disheartening that is for people to watch the businesses that they've poured their heart and soul into take a terrible hit, and to have people adjust to this new reality that may never allow them that opportunity again. You know, we can all hope and strive to do it right and hope that we don't do too much damage while we're trying to figure it out. So